So this is daf Yomi being recorded ahead of time. This is the daf Nun Gimel in Masechet Bava Batra, which is the daf for Shabbat or Motzaei Shabbat Nachamu, which I'm recording ahead of time. So let's start. And I don't exactly know where you got to on Friday because it hasn't started yet, but I'm going to start from the fifth to last line, last word on the line on daf Nun Bet Amud Bet. So you might have already done this. It might be a review. But just to remember, we've been talking about making a chazakah, right? Someone using a chazakah basically to acquire a field. So says the Gemara today, Tani Rav Hoshaya, 5 lines from the bottom. Tani Rav Hoshaya, B'Kiddushin de Bei Levi. In Bei Levi, we've seen this before. In the school of Levi, they taught Masechet Kiddushin, and Rav Hoshaya taught a Breita in that context. And he quoted the following Breita. Na'al Gadar Paratz. If you do an action in a field, in a property, Na'al means you close the door, you lock the door, Gadar means you put up a fence. Sorry, you put up a fence, Paratz means you open up the fence. In any of these cases, if you do it kosher, you do a little change in the property, if you do it bifanav, in front of the previous owner, harizu chazakah, that's an indication that you bought it from him and you own it, because someone would not let you come and cut down his fence or build a fence if they didn't give over the property to you. But bifanav in, ask the Gemara, is it true? Only in front of the owner, shelo b'fanav lo. But if the owner was not there and you did it, is it not something that shows that you're taking ownership? Amar Rava, no, it doesn't mean that. Hachikamar. Here's what it means. Bifanav, if you do it in front of the owner, lo tzarich lemeimar leich chazeku kni. He doesn't have to also say at that time, go and acquire this thing, meaning go acquire my field that I'm selling to you or giving to you as a gift. And you go and you make an action, and that shows that you've acquired it. If it's in front of him, the fact that he's watching you is enough. But shelo b'fanav, if he's not there, maybe you're just going and opening the gate in the field. So it's not a proof that you bought it. And tzarich lemeimar lechazek v'kani, you have to go, he has to say to you, let's say he's in a different town, the Rashbam says, or he's in a different part of the town. He says to you, go, I want to give you this field, or I want to sell you this field, go and acquire it. Now, how do you acquire a field? So one way you acquire a field is through chazakah. And the chazakah is that you go and you make an action in the field, in the gate, in the fence, etc. Ask the Gemara now on top of Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. If that's true, Ba'i, we are the second line, Ba'i Rav Matna, ask Rav Matna, Heich, right? How would a person go and acquire something if, no, we'll see the question, what this question was. Ba'i Rav, sorry, I read it wrong. Not Rav Matana. Boy Rav asked the following question: Matana heich. If let's say they're giving it to you as a gift, what's the formulation? What we just said is that he has to say lech chazeku kni if he's not in front of the field. If he is in front of the field, he doesn't have to say that. What if it's a matana? What do you have to say? Amar Shmuel, what's the question? Mighty boy leila abba. Remember, he called Rav Abba, right? There's a whole debate. Was Abba really his name and Rav was the honorific, or was Rav his name and Abba's the honorific? Either way, my tiboy leila Abba. What's your question? Why would a gift be any different than a sale? Says Shmuel, Hashta, ma mecher. Look, in a sale, kayav lezus, you're paying the person, right? However, if he's not in front of you with the field, I amar le chazeku kni in, if he says to you, go acquire it, then your chazakah means something, ilo lo, so matana lo kol shekain. Certainly with a matana, where you're not even giving him anything, if he says to you, I want to give you a gift, and he's not in front of you, you're not in front of the field, right? You're sitting in the office, he says, I want to give you a gift. You walk over to his house or his field, and you make a change in the field. The question is that a kinyan? Now, by a mecher, it's not a kinyan, because since he's not in front of you, unless he says to you, lech chazeku kni, what you do in the field is not considered to be notable. So, asked Shmuel, certainly by a matana, you would have to say lech chazeku kni. Says the Gemara, but Rav thinks that maybe that's not the case. Man diyav matana b'ayin yafa yahev. Maybe when you're giving a gift, or when you're selling something, you're parting with it reluctantly. You don't necessarily want to sell it, but you need the money. So there, we only assume that you mean to give over the chazakah, the kinyan, if you say lech chazeku kni. But maybe with the matana, you don't even have to say those words. You could just say to the person, I'm giving you a gift. The person goes and makes a kinyan in your field by making a chazakah, and that's enough. Says Shmuel, presumably, that you need both, right? That you need to, if you're not in front of the field, and he goes to make a chazakah, you have to have said lech chazek ukni. Okay, that is the machloket Rav and Shmuel, or at least the thoughts of Rav and Shmuel. Now, ask the Gemara, what does it mean when it says you make a chazakah, you make a change in the field? Vikama. What are we up to? Sorry, I'm learning from online. Kama is the sixth line from the top. What does it mean when it says kolshu? Kama kolshu, right? The Mishnah said around 10 days ago that if you make a change in the field to kolshu, that's a chazakah. What does it mean a little bit? What's a little bit of a change? Says the Gemara Kiddush Shmuel. Shmuel defined this. Amar Shmuel, Shmuel said, gadar, gader, right? That's a verb of a noun, right? You build a fence, v'hishlimo la'asara. You complete 10 tvachim, right? So it could have been the fence was there and it was previously built, but it was shorter and therefore it couldn't really keep things out. You added on a little bit to the fence. Or the opposite is if you break down the fence, right? Paretz pirza, there's a gate in the way, no one can get into the field, and you knock it down enough so that animals or people can enter or exit through that entryway. Arezu chazaka. That's considered to be a change in the field, and therefore you acquire the field. Again, if someone says that you can't go and do this to a stranger's field, that's stealing. If someone says to you, I'll sell you my field or I give it to you as a gift, or the case we're going to have very frequently in today's daf and tomorrow, which is a case where it is ownerless, right? A person died, they have no yorshim. In the case is usually if they're a ger, right? So they are a convert, they have no halachic relatives, and therefore their stuff is hefker. So who acquires it? The first person who goes and makes a kinyan by doing a chazakah. I'll ask the Gemara, I don't understand Shmuel's halacha. What does it mean you made a fence? If originally the fence was such that people could not easily climb over it and get into the field, and then you made it a little bit higher, and they still can't climb into the field, my oven. So what did you do, Sachakol? Right? It was not accessible. It's still not accessible. You didn't add very much. Ella, it must be the Meikar Havisalkile, right? That originally people could walk into the field. The fence was not high enough to stop anyone from walking in. And you made it high enough, and now you can't walk in. Hashta lo salkile, and now you can't walk in. Well, why would you call that a small change? Tuva avad. You made a big deal. You made a fence. So what do you mean you make a small chazakah? Lotzricha, the case is where the meikar avisakele baravcha. Initially, the fence was high enough that it was low enough, that you can walk in easily. Now you still can get in, but it's difficult. Hashta kasakele beduchka. Now you got to really jump over it, right? You got to really stretch to get over it. So you've made it more difficult. So you didn't stop people from coming in, because that would be considered to be a significant change, but you made it more challenging. So that's considered to be a kinyan. And we asked the same question about pirza. Hi, pirza, when you made a hole in the fence or a hole in the gate, initially you could walk through that opening, and you made it a little wider so they can walk through more easily. Hashanami ailiba, so then my oven. If initially you could walk through, now you can walk through, you didn't actually do anything. Ella must be the maker of lohavi ailiba. Originally, there was a tiny little hole in the fence. No one can fit through it, right? And you widened it, hashtaka ailiba, and now people can walk through it. So then again, tufa avad. Why would you call that a small change, right? We said in the Mishnah, even if you make a small chazakah, you make it a little bit, that's considered to be a chazakah. But tuva avad. In this case, you've done a lot. You've opened up the whole thing. Answers the Gemara, the same answer. Lo tzricha demeikara va'ailiba beduchka. Originally, you could squeeze through that narrow hole in the fence, if you were skinny, and your buttons would come off, right? So beduchka, which means through effort, and you made it wider so that now people can get through it easily with ease. And so therefore, that's considered to be a significant change, and you acquire the object if either it's hefker, so from a ger, or if someone says they want to give it to you. Amar Basim Reb Yochanan. Says Rabasim Reb Yochanan, we are 8 lines from the bottom. Natan Sror. Let's say you put a stone into the wall. Now, we think that means that you're blocking up. There's a wall, like a dam, let's say, and you're blocking up, like the dike, right? So you put a stone into the wall, v'ho'il, and that helps, meaning it prevents the wall from allowing water to go through. That's enough. That's a chazakah. Or natal tzror v'ho'il. Let's say you took a stone out of the wall. Let's say the person wanted the water to flow into their field, and you took a stone out that opened it up. Harezu chazakah. In both cases, that's a chazakah. Says Gemara, now, what did you do exactly? My natan, my natal. What does Rabbi Yochanan mean, Rabbi Yochanan, when you put a stone or you took out a stone? Ilema, if you say it means what I just described to you, natan sror, that you put a stone in that little stop place in the wall, v'sachar maya mine, and you stopped, right? You closed up the water so that water was flowing out, and by putting the stone there, you stopped it from going out, and therefore the water flooded the field so that all your rice grew. So that's a big deal. We're going to say in a second, right? I'm sorry, we're not there yet. So let's say the water was flowing out of the field. Sorry, I take it back. It was a case where the guy had a fence around his field. The fence was meant to hold back the water from leaving the field. He wanted the field to be overflowing with water. There's a hole in his fence, like the case of the dike. There's a hole in the dike. You go over and you put a stone into that hole and you stop it from leaking, right? Or the case might be natal shore, where you took out a stone because the water was meant to drain, right? The drain got plugged by a stone and you unplugged the drain. In either case, afik mayim not, and then water went out the way it was supposed to. In either case, that's not a sign that you own the field. There's a defect in the guy's irrigation system, and you're helping him out. That's called Shabbat Aveda, right? You see someone's field getting ruined, and you go and help him. It doesn't prove that you own the field. It proves that you're a nice person and you have a mitzvah to do that. The name we use for this is high. That's considered a case of mavriach arim minechsei chaverohu. You're chasing away a lion from somebody else's field, right? It's like if you see a bear or a lion going to someone else's food and you chase it away, it doesn't mean you own the food, right? You're doing the mitzvah of Shabbat Aveda. So that's required for you to do. Ella, the case must be Natan Sror. The case of Natan Sror is where you do the opposite. You put a stone in that therefore allows the field to be irrigated, right? So you put a stone in that prevents the water from leaving the field, and you're basically helping the field. Or Natal Sror, or you take a stone out that allows that allows more water to go into the field. And basically, both cases, you are enhancing the field. You're not preventing a tragedy from happening. And in those cases, you wouldn't be doing that unless you own the field. Why do you care if water goes in this field or doesn't go in this field? The fact that you enhanced the irrigation of the field is a sign that you own the field, again, in a situation where either you have permission to do it or it's hefker and no one else owns the field. Continues the Gemara 2 lines on the bottom. Rabasi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, let's say you have shtei sadot. You have two fields. And again, the easiest case here is that they're hefker, right? They belong to a ger. The ger died. Nobody owns them. So you go to these two fields, there's two fields side by side. And one boundary, remember the meitzar, we've had this many times already, is a raised portion where you could walk by. Remember, we had a meitzar shechsiko barabim. Many people make it a shortcut. There's special halachot. Here, it's above fields that are generally flooded. You have a raised area, which is a natural boundary. So these two fields and the boundary between it, meaning the raised hill between it, were owned by a ger. The ger died, and they're now hefker. So now you go and you're hifzik ba'achat mehem. You go and you make some effort. You start digging and hoeing. We'll see the cases in a minute. In one of the fields, liknota, you say, I'm making a kinyan in the field. I want to own it. Says the Brayta, says Rabbi Yochanan, sorry, kana. That's great. You did a chazakah. It was hefker. You showed ownership. You own the field. Now let's say, turn the page, daf mem nun gimel amad bet. You dug a little bit in the field, liknot ota, in order to acquire that field, ve'et charverta. And you said, I want the whole property. This ger died. He left two fields and a boundary between them. I'm working in field A to acquire the whole property. Says Rabbi Yochanan, it don't work that way. Oto kana. You're kona the field that you worked in, but chaverta lo kana. But you're not kona the other field because you didn't work in the other field. They are separated by a boundary, and your work in one field does not give you the other field. We're going to see in a bit, right, how much of the field you get, right? What if it's a 50-acre field? Does that mean if you work, and dig 1/4 of it, you get the whole field? So we'll discuss that. And here we're talking about two small fields separated by a boundary. If you work in one field to acquire that field and its neighbor, that's not enough. But if, let's say you say, I don't really want the field I'm working in, but I'm close to it. I'm going to work in field A, liknot et charverta, in order to show my ownership of field B. Says Rabbi Yochanan, af ota lo kana. Then you're not kona anything because you didn't want to be kona A and you didn't work in B, so you're not kona either field. Now, ask Rabbi Zera, by Rabbi Zera. Now we are 3 lines on the top of Daf Nun Gimel Amud Bet. Let's say you worked in one field and you're hichzik ba'achat mehem. You do a chazakah. Remember, it's working in the field. You open up the gates. You dig a little bit. You irrigate it. You do work in the field. Liknot ota. You say, I want to acquire this field. Ve'et ha-metzar, and the boundary next to it. Now, we think that maybe if you want to acquire the boundary next to it, right, that's part of the field because the field is subsumed in its boundary. And et chaverta, and its partner. So the question is there any chance that by acquiring the field, doing a kinyan in this field A, and having in mind to be machzik in the field A, the boundary and field B, mahu, is that enough to get you the whole property? Mi'amrina, do you say, look, meitzar da'arachadu, that the land in the middle connects the two pieces of property, vikani. And since you want to acquire the land in the middle, which is the meitzar, you're acquiring both parts of the field. Or Dilmar, do you say that's not the case? Each field is independent. And since you only worked in field A, you can only acquire field A and not field B. Teiko, we don't have a resolution of that question. So that leaves as a teiko. So again, these are not, I don't know how practical today, but in those times, maybe it was more practical. And that question was left hanging. Now, 6 lines on the top. Ask Reb Elazar the next case. By Reb Elazar. Let's say instead of working in field A and saying, I want to acquire field A plus the boundary plus field B, you actually do a chazakah in the boundary, in the middle ground between field A and field B. So you make a chazakah in the meitzar with the intent that I want to be koneh both fields. So Mahu, what's the halacha then? Mi'amrina, do you say, well, hi meitzar, look, think about it. The middle of the field, it's like picking up the reins of a horse, right? Or not the reins of a horse, but the reins of like a bunch of cattle. Let's say you have 4 horses or 4 cows, and you pick up the reins, you presume they're koneh all of them because you're doing an act that controls all of it. So maybe the boundary between the fields is what controls the fields, basically. And so do you say that meitzar, hi meitzar, afsere da'arahu, it's what do you call it, the halter, the thing you hold on to, is it the reins, basically, of the land, and kani. And therefore, by being koneh the meitzar, you're koneh everything around it. Oh, Dilmor, do you say, no, again, it's not the case. This is one field, this is another field, and you'd have to work in each individual field in order to be koneh the fields. Teiko, again, we don't resolve that question. Ask the Gemara, this is a retzef, a continuation of the same questions. Ask the Gemara now around 10 or 12 lines from the top. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, what if it's not 2 fields side by side, but it's 2 houses, one within the other? Now, this is a little different because they're not 2 independent houses, right? There's an inner house and an outer house, right? And the only way to get to the inner house is by walking through the outer house. So again, the same case. The person dies, they're a ger, they leave behind a beautiful courtyard with an outer house, and inside of that is an inner home. So let's say, says Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua, shtei batim, you have 2 houses, and one is inside the other one, and they're hefker. So if you're going, you're hichzik b'chitzon liknoto, you go to the outside house, you lay down, you start cooking. We'll see in a second how you make a kinyan, but let's say you show that you live in that house. You lay down, you go to sleep, you build the windows, you build the door, whatever you did, you make a chazakah in order to be koneh, kana. So you're koneh the outside house, but not the inside. You had no intention for the inside. If you say to yourself, or you say out loud, doing this kinyan, liknot oto, the et hapnimi, I want to be koneh the outside house and the inner house, then chitzon kana, you are koneh the outside, but you have no business in the inside. You never went in there. You never did anything in the inside house. It's separate. Pnimi lo kana, you're not koneh the inside house. But if you said, I'm doing something, I'm building a doorway, let's say, I'm closing a window up in the outside house because I want to be koneh only the inside house, then liknot et hapnimi alone, says the Gemara, av chitzon nami lo kana. You're not koneh the inside because you never went there. And at the outside, your kinyan in the outside was not meant to own it because you didn't do it to own the house. You did it to buy the other house or to acquire the inside house, and that is not sufficient. What if, continues the Gemara, hichzik b'pnimi liknoto. You go into the inside house and you say, I want to be koneh the inside house, then kano. That's, of course, obvious. You made a chazakah, that's a kinyan. But if you said to yourself, I'm doing a chazakah in the inside house, liknot oto the et hachitzon, and I also want to acquire the outside house, then kana shnehem. Then it's different than two fields, where if you acquire one field, you don't get the other field. Here, because the way you get to the inside house is by going through the outside house, by making a kinyan on the inside house with the intention of acquiring both, that's enough. Because they are basically, the inside has to be gotten to through the outside, and therefore it's viewed as being an extension, essentially, of the inside house, and you're kona both. But if you make a kinyan on the inside and you say, or you think, liknotet hachitzon, I want to do this because I want the outside house, then you're not going to anything. Af pnimilo kana, not the outside because you didn't make a kinyan in the outside, and not the inside because you didn't make a kinyan in the inside for the purpose of owning the inside house. So that's the halacha of Rav Yochanan. Continues the Gemara again. We are at the bet in the Bach now. Amar Rav Nachman, halfway down. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua. Says Rav Nachman in the name of Rabba bar Avua, let's say you are boneh palturin gedolin b'nechsei hager. Okay, it's a fascinating case. A ger dies, right? He leaves behind an empty lot, property. Okay, you want to acquire the property. So we say, if you go making a chazakah on that property, you're koning the property. Let's say, says Rav Nachman, in the name of Rabba bar Avua, you build a huge castle, right? A mega house on his property, but you don't put a door on the house. Uba acher v'hemid lahen delatot. And somebody else comes along and they build the doors, kana. The outside, the new person is the one who's koned the property and your house, presumably. Why? Because my time up, because the first guy, he basically, although he built a great big castle, so to speak, right, on the house, Kama, the first one, livnei ba'al mahudaf. Really, all he's doing is the words literally mean he's turning over bricks. Meaning, by not finishing off the property, by not putting up a door, right, which is an ability to lock the door and make it private, everything you built is meaningless. It's not considered to be a ownership until you seal it up in some way. And so just going in and working on a house or working on a land does not make you an owner unless you actually do it something that's protected, that's private. In this case, putting up a door and closing the door. Putting up a door means you make a frame and you lock it. And so that would be the kinyan. Amar Rav Dimi bar Yosef, Amar Rav Elazar, in the same vein, Motzei platrin b'nechsei hager. Let's say you find a palterin, right? Again, you find this castle on the property of a ger. So a ger died, maybe with the castle intact or without, and someone else either built it or it was there. And you came and you added one level of finishing up. Sad behen siyud echad. You plastered over one, shaky wall that needed plaster. Oh, kiyor echad, kiyor usually means like tiles, instead of plaster, they put tiles on it. If you do an action like that, you are kanan. Then you are koneh the house because you did something that finished it. The kama. Now, how much do you have to do? Rav Yosef, amma. You have to do an amma. You have to add an amma of improvement, let's say, to the house of the ger. The ger died. It goes to whoever comes in, but someone has to make a kinyan. How do you make a kinyan? One way to make a kinyan is to improve the house. You paint over, you plaster over, you tile over one amma. That's enough, but not anywhere. Amar Rav Chisda keneged hapetach. It means where people can see it, right in front of the doorway. In front of the doorway is the most important amma of the house, right? And there, if you make an action there, you're basically showing that you're the owner and you acquire the house from Hefker because the ger left it over and no one got it after them. So that's enough, and that's considered to be a kinyan. Of course, there's other ways to make a kinyan, as we said, putting up a door, but even painting a little bit is considered to be a kinyan. Now, says Rav Amram, we are 8 lines from the bottom, maybe 10 lines from the bottom, 10 lines from the bottom, second word on the line. Amar Rav Amram, Hi Milta, the following statement, Amar Lan Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet told us the following halacha, and after he told it to us, or when he told it to us, Anharinhu enayim imatnita. He opened up our eyes, meaning he showed us the proof from a braita, right? What did Rav Sheshet tell us? Hamatzia matzaot b'nechsei hager. Let's say you spread out, your matzot are like your mats that you sleep on, a mattress, basically, a bedding. You lay out a bedding in the house of a ger, kana. That's enough. You don't need to actually build anything, paint it, as long as you put down your bed and you go to sleep. It doesn't say you go to sleep, but let's just say you go lay down your bed in the garret. That is showing ownership because we'll see in a second. No one's going to walk into somebody else's house, right, and lay down their bed. You might go into someone else's house and rest, I guess, but you're not going to make it into a home unless it's really yours. He enlightened us, showed us the proof of it from a Braita. Mahi, what was the Braita? The Tanya. We have a Braita that expands on our Mishnah. We are, 8 lines on the bottom now, 6 maybe. Ketzad b'chazaka. How do you acquire something using a chazaka? This is a Braita we had in Masechet Kiddushin. Says the Braita now, second to last narrow line. Na'alo minalo. Let's say you lock the gate, right? Na'al minalo means you lock sorry, I take it back. Minal is a shoe, not a gate. The case in Kiddushin is talking about how do you make a chazakah in a slave, right? We said one way to acquire a slave is through money. Another way is chazakah, by using them, basically. What is a way? So na'al lo min alo. If the slave put on your shoe, right? You said to the person, you have to now work for me. And he obviously showed, he or she, that they're working for you by putting on your shoes. That's a chazakah, because you wouldn't do that for someone unless you were working for them. Oh, hitir minalo, lo minalo, or they untie your shoes, meaning they take off your laces and take it off. Again, these are subservient things that you wouldn't do unless you were a slave. Oh, shaholich kelav achrav the beit hamerchatz, or you carry his kelav, which usually means his. Remember that when they went to the bathhouse, they brought a pot and something to put the water on with and a towel. So you carry the bathhouse tools, implements after the person. That's what a slave would do. Or hifshito, he undressed the owner, right? So the slave undressed the owner, or hirchitzo, or he washed him, or sacho, he anointed him, he smeared him with oil, or gardo. Gardo is where they would comb, they would rub off, like they rub off the oil after you go to the bathhouse. Or he'll be show, he put your clothes on you, or hinilo, right? Or he puts on his shoes. Now we're going to see that's putting on the shoes, not tying or untying the shoes. Or higbiho. Or if the slave picked you up, right? Let's say you're walking down the street and there's mud there. So you don't want to step in it, and the slave picks you up and carries you across it. These are all actions that a slave would do. In all of these cases, if the slave or the prospective slave does this, kinna'o, the person is koneh, the slave, that's a chazakah. And says that was the proof he had. And Amar Rabbi Shimon, now Rabbi Shimon, we'll see the proof in a second. Rabbi Shimon concluded the Braita by saying, wait a second, lo tehei chazakah gedola mihagba'ah. The chazakah cannot be greater than lifting somebody up, because hagba'ah koneh b'kol makom. Like we know always, right? Whenever you lift an object up, you're koneh. So picking up the slave is hagba'ah of the slave, is not greater than a chazakah. It says, what does that have to do with any? My kamar. What is Rabbi Shimon saying? Hachikam. No, this is what the Braita really means to say at the end of the Braita. Hachikam. What are we up to? 3 lines on the bottom. The Braita, the Tanakama says, Higbio the Rabbo. If the slave picks up the owner, then kano. Then the owner is kano the slave, because picking up an owner is a sign of being a slave, right? If I lift somebody up and carry him across the water, I'm the subservient person. But the opposite, let's say the owner picks the slave up. Higbia Rabbo lo. If the Rav picks him up, then lo kana'o. Then he's not kona, because that's not a normal thing. It's not normal for an owner or a master to pick up his slave. So that's just an action you did, and it's not enough to make a kinyan. And that's what the Tanakhama says. And Rabbi Shimon says, Amar Rabbi Shimon, lo tehei chazaka gedola mihagba'ah. Says Rabbi Shimon, there's no way that a chazakah can be greater than hagba'ah, meaning hagba'ah koneh b'kol makom. Hagba'ah is koneh everywhere, meaning if you buy a suit and you pick up the suit, you're koneh. Same thing would be true. If you buy a slave and pick up the slave, you can be koneh. It's not through chazakah, right? It is through the other mechanism of hagba'ah. And so that's the Braita. But what you see from the Braita to prove the case of Rav Sheshet is that anything you do that shows ownership is enough. You don't need to build, you don't need to paint, you don't need to make a door. That's enough. And in this case, the fact that you spread out your bed and laid in the house shows that you own the house, and that's a sufficient kinyan for a chazakah. And that's how we establish the halacha of Rav Sheshet. Let me do one more line, okay? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, last line of Daf Nun Gimel Amud Bet. Reb Yirmiyah Bira'a was his name, right? Said Reb Yirmiyah Bira'a, Amar Rav Yehuda, Haiman Deshada Lifta Beifili Da'ara. Diger. Turn the page enough. Nun Dalid Amud Aleph. A person who, right, there's a ger dies. He leaves an empty field. The field was ready to be planted. So there's already rows. That's a filiar, the rows in the field. You take a turnip, right, or seeds of a turnip, and you drop it into that row, okay? And then it grows. It grows to be a beautiful turnip. However, says the Gemara, that's not a kinyan. That does not show that you did something in the field. Lo havi chazaka. That's not enough to call it a chazaka. My time, why is it? Because the idna dishada, at the time that you threw the seeds into the field, at that point, nothing was growing, right? Nothing grew. Lo havi shvacha. You didn't change the field. There was already a hole in the field. You dropped some seeds in. There's nothing new in the field. There's no value yet in the field. Hashtadik shabach. Now you waited a month. The turnips grew. That's great. But you didn't do anything for that action. Memela kashavach. It did it on its own. So since you didn't actually make the row in the field, it was already a space for the turnip, you are not considered to be the owner just by dropping it in there and it passively growing. In order to make it a field that you own through chazakah, you actually have to make a difference in the field at the time you make the chazakah, which is the initial time. If you raked the field or hoed the field, that would be a chazakah, but just planting things in pre-existing holes does not count as a chazakah. And tomorrow, we'll pick it up from Amar Shmuel, right, where we will get into further cases, fourth line from the top, we'll get into further cases about how you have to change a field in order to make it a chazakah. So I hope everyone enjoyed this daf. I hope the recording was clear, and I look forward to learning again soon.